Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started now. Good morning and welcome to City Club Missoula's September Forum, Getting Schooled, Perspectives on Public Education in Montana. My name is Brett Rosenberg, and I have the privilege of serving as chair of City Club Missoula, its board of directors, and I am really, really happy to see so many people here today. I think we had 30 more people than we expected show up, which is a fantastic deal given the subject. City Club's mission is to bring people together to inform and inspire on issues vital to the community through public forums that encourage the discussion of new ideas and the free exchange of thought. We have a deep commitment to civility and civil discourse, even when we discuss challenging issues. Before I introduce our moderator, some thank yous are in order. Thank you to Missoula Community Access Television, which records our forums as part of their media assistant grants to nonprofit organizations. MCAT serves our community on cable channels 189 and 190, and I think live streams, I hope, our forums on its local live platform as well. You can also find prior videos of City Club forums on our website, cityclubmissoula.com. Thanks also to our sponsors, in particular those at the executive level. They are the University of Montana, Blackfoot Communication, and First Security Bank. Our executive level sponsors are key partners in helping to expand audience access and reliably planning and conducting our forums. We're grateful to all of our sponsors, and we invite you to join them by going to our website. And of course, thanks to our board of directors who are roaming around here today, and our administrator, Danny Howlett, who keeps everything working, and we could not do this without her. City Club Missoula would also like to acknowledge that we are in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people, some of whom are present with us today at this forum. Today we honor the path that they have always shown us in caring for this place for generations to come. Our moderator today is Jill Valley. Jill is an anchor at KPAX, where she started in 1992. She grew up in Spokane and graduated from Washington State University with a degree in communications. Jill has been honored as Montana Broadcaster of the Year 7 times and has received similar awards for writing, feature reporting, and hard news. Jill will introduce our panelists, and I will see you at the break where we'll begin our table talk at roughly 12:25. I'll explain that when the time comes, but I will turn it over to Jill now.
All right, thank you. I was thinking, why am I so nervous? I think it's because I haven't done an in-person thing for 2 years because of COVID. Thanks a lot. And the ones that I've done before have been all virtual, so it's good to see people instead of camera. But I'm really happy to be here, and I'm excited about this topic. It's education. My own daughter is actually a freshman at Whitworth University in Spokane after graduating from Sentinel, and it's been 3 weeks and she hasn't come home yet. So high hopes this is going to stick. I'm not sure if I should put Whitworth Mom on the car yet. I don't want to tempt fate, but it's great to be here, and I love City Club with all the topics that are covered. It's such an important part of our community. And today, again, we're talking about education in Montana, what steps we can take through K through 12 education, maybe even rethinking our approach in the long term, a transformation perhaps to make our education system the best in the nation, because we know so often the strength of our state comes from our students and our schools and how we educate our children. We'll talk about how this all works with the legislature and the Board of Public Education and the school boards. And I just know you're going to have some great questions, and our panel is really impressive. I was going to shorten their bios, but I couldn't figure out a way to do so because it's just very impressive, and as I'm reading them, I feel very unworthy. So our first panelist is Dave Beatty. He is a representative born and raised in Hamilton. He served as an officer in the U.S. Army for 30 years, both in combat units and as a professor at West Point before retiring as a colonel and then moving back to his home state. Prior to being elected to the state legislature in 2018, Dave served on the Hamilton School Board for 9 years. And while in the legislature, he chairs the Joint Appropriations Subcommittee for Education. His education includes a BS in Civil Engineering from Montana State University, an MA in National Security and Strategic Studies from the U.S. Naval War College, and he has a PhD in Space Physics from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I know it seems weird as I read all of your accolades as you sit there going, yeah, that's me, but okay. I guess we need to call you Dr. Beatty then, after all. Okay, our next panelist is Lance Melton. He serves as the executive director for the Montana School Boards Association. He has served there since 1996. He previously served as an attorney, a lobbyist, director of advocacy, and general counsel before the MTSBA board selected him as the executive director in the year 2000. He has long represented and championed the constitutional role of community-elected volunteer trustees in developing the full potential of each person under Article 10 of the Montana Constitution. Working collaboratively with lawmakers throughout Montana, he has helped craft and pass legislation expanding opportunities for students and families so they can enjoy personalized learning paths in Montana's public schools. He has a BA in political science with the highest honors from the University of Montana, earned his JD from the University of Montana School of Law back in 1992, where he was selected as a member of the Public Land Law Review. Before joining MTSBA, he served as an attorney and a lobbyist for the Montana Department of Commerce. Thank you so much for being with us here today. We appreciate it. And our final panelist today is Mccall Flynn. Hello. She began her career as the executive director of the Board of Public Education back on January 6 of 2021. She is an Anaconda native, a graduate of Carroll College from Helena. She comes to this role after previously serving 8 years under Governor Steve Bullock. Starting in 2013, Ms. Flynn worked in numerous capacities such as project manager, policy advisor to the lieutenant governor, and education policy advisor. She has worked extensively with lawmakers and legislative staff, the Office of Public Instruction, members of the Montana Public Education Coalition, and other education stakeholders. She tells us she places a high value on the importance of public education in Montana and has the unique perspective to work collaboratively with others to increase student educational opportunities and to improve educational outcomes. She currently resides in Helena, where she has lived since 2009. So that serves to tell you we are in some pretty good company today to talk about these very important issues as we take a deep dive, perhaps, into the education system in Montana, where we need to improve, and how it all works together for the best outcome for Montana students. So our panelists will get 8 minutes to talk to you about what they do, what they think, and we'll start now with Dr. Beatty.
Well, if you could, I see the slides have come up. Can you hear me? Well, I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, I'm happy that City Club invited me to come and be in a forum like this, because in today's world, it's so difficult to find a forum where you can have thoughtful discussions with people, and City Club has a great reputation for just that. The other thing I'd like to say is Jill is a lot smarter than I am. She has spent her entire career here in Montana. It took me 30 years before I finally figured out it was time to come home. And so Jill, you are a heck of a lot smarter than I am. Now, yeah, I mean, there's a lot we could talk about in the education realm. I only have 8 minutes. I think I just used one of them. So I put together a quick PowerPoint slideshow here. And what I want to talk to you about is, in understanding education in the state of Montana, it's important to know how the governance of that education system works. And so there are a number of entities within our government that are charged with executing the education mission in K-12 education. First of all, you have the legislature, of which I'm a member. And as you can see here, the legislature has two fundamental roles here that bear on the topic we have right now. One is we must provide a basic system of free, quality, public elementary and secondary schools, and we must fund it and distribute that funding in an equitable manner. The next player is, of course, now we have a basic system that's defined by the legislature and funded by the legislature. The Board of Public Education then exercises general supervision over that system. Next of all, we have boards of trustees, that is to say school boards. And school boards supervise and control those schools. Notice that as you look at this, you can kind of see there's a little bit of overlap potentially between the Board of Public Education and the school board trustees. And of course, this is one of the things that makes working out and coordinating our efforts challenging, but I think that we're doing a reasonably good job on that as well. I'll just make a pitch for school boards myself. Lance and I are in an absolute agreement on one thing. The rubber really hits the road when it comes to governance with your local school board. That's where the action is, and that's where you can influence the education of the children in your communities the best. The rest of us are there to facilitate, in my mind, this is me speaking now, the rest of us exist to facilitate the actions of our local school boards. Of course, one would expect the superintendent of public instruction to be mentioned in the Constitution. Interestingly, the superintendent of public instruction isn't mentioned in Article 10, which deals with education, but rather in Article 6, dealing with the executive, and does not have any specified roles. We give the superintendent of public instruction her duties per law. And the superintendent, of course, this is a position that dates clear back to our original Constitution before 1900. I suspect the superintendent of public instruction during those times was the superintendent of schools for the schools across the state. Now, the superintendent oversees the second largest overall budget in the state and the largest portion of state funds that are distributed. Finally, last but not least, the governor is not mentioned specifically, but the governor does have a duty to provide recommendations to us. The governor can be very influential in terms of education policy if the governor chooses to do so. And of course, in the legislature, the governor proposes a budget, and we spend a session disposing of that budget. So the governor does have a role in this as well. So with this in mind, with these various players in governance, how do you go about, having coherent education policy? I think that's actually a challenge, and one that's not clearly, is certainly not clearly defined in our Constitution. So one thing that we did just recently is on the 6th of June and just this last week on the 13th of September, we decided to convene a gathering of those so-called constitutional authorities, or constitutional players, if you will, the ones I've just identified. Two of our legislative interim committees met. I chair the Education Interim Budget Committee. We had the members of the Board of Public Education, the School Board Association, Lance, representing the 400 school districts across the state. The Superintendent of Public Instruction, her deputies were there. We had policy advisors from the Governor's Office, and we even brought in representation from the Board of Regents and the Commissioner of Higher Education, because education should not be viewed in stovepipes, but our Commissioner of Higher Education, our university system, provides a lot of service. And we have dual credit programs going on, career and technical education programs that cross the gamut. And so we thought it was important to bring these folks together and then ask ourselves, what should we do, or is there anything we can do to align our efforts as we move forward, understanding that we each have a distinct constitutional role. I won't go into detail because we spent 2 9-hour meetings going through this, and I only had 8 minutes, and I think I've used 7.5 so far. We did take a look at a case for change, and the case for change is based upon taking a close examination of how we are stacking up as a country against our other countries in the world, and how Montanans are doing relative to other states. And I think that a compelling case for change can be made, that our current education system is based upon a model that was appropriate and highly effective in the early 1900s. When we were industrializing this country. But now the economy has changed, and the need to approach education is different. With that in mind, we have an emerging consensus amongst these constitutional authorities that there are 4 things that we ought to focus on as we look forward. And this is long-term effort, I think, that's going to be involved. One is embracing proficiency-based learning, whereby we meet students where they are, and advancement is based strictly on proficiency and not upon time on task. In order to pull off this sort of an educational transformation will require a transformation of the teaching profession. Our teachers must be prepared to embrace and put into effect this proficiency-based learning. That means teaching preparation programs need to change, and also just the treatment of teachers as a profession within the schools needs to change as well. Things like professional collaboration between teachers and things like that. It involves things like making time available for for mentorships between teachers and older teachers and new teachers and that sort of thing. The other thing that's clear across the world is that career and technical education is an important component of those successful programs that you see in other countries. And we are getting a much greater awareness of the importance of career and technical education within our populace. It will come as no surprise to anyone that for at least 4 decades we have put such a high priority on four-year college education that we have given short shrift to career and technical education. We need to do better. Part of that's a change of attitude. Part of it is a matter of resourcing. And finally, high-performing school systems across the world have robust early childhood education programs. And those can take very, very different forms in different countries and in different settings. But it seems to be very clear that addressing early childhood education is critical to moving our education system forward. So going forward, we as the constitutional authorities have agreed that it's important for us to make the case for change. I don't have time to make it in detail right now. We need to build on initiatives that are already underway. We already are having reformations in our teacher preparation programs. As Lance can speak to later, our school districts, based on laws we have now, can embrace proficiency-based education or can adopt it. It's a matter of having people understand the need for making that move. We also, in the intervening time, since we met last week, we need to identify what opportunities each of us constitutional authorities can do to move this forward. The nature of government, the nature of bureaucracy is you work in certain stovepipes. And the idea here was if we brought ourselves together and talked about a few things, we may break down some of the barriers between that so that we're not working at cross purposes, but rather working to achieve the goals that I just stated earlier. And finally, the final thing that we agreed upon was that we need to continue collaborating in the way that we did in the 2 meetings we had. It's not a formal process, not anticipating right now putting this in law, but I think the people of Montana to have the education system that fulfills the directives that we find in our Constitution require that we, from time to time, put our heads together. And I got to tell you, having those 2 meetings and spending the time with the folks around the table, I'm highly optimistic about the future of education in the state of Montana. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Lance Melton, and as I mentioned before, he's the Executive Director for the Montana School Boards Association.
Thank you, Jill. Can you hear me out there on this okay? It's so great to be here in Missoula. I grew up here and would have stayed here if I could have out of college like everybody else in the world, right? But truly just remarkable to see so many friends and people that I haven't seen in years and just to be among you and see this vibrance and the intellectual curiosity that's obviously embedded in this room. So I represent elected school boards, and what that means in Montana is that I represent more elected officials by many multiples than anyone else, 1,400 plus people who volunteer several 100,000 hours a year of their time without any compensation whatsoever. And if you look back at what the constitutional framers thought about that, they said, well, all they get is a bunch of complaints. And in some sense, that may be true, but they've been getting those complaints, fielding them, turning them into opportunity for kids since 25 years before we became a state. 1865 was the first elected school board in Montana, and those people carry that tradition forward. Let me give you a couple of examples of what makes these people wonderfully weird and cool. Okay? First of all, we're close to 100 years at the Montana School Boards Association. That organization ran itself for over 40 years with elected volunteer trustees who managed to put out a monthly publication and conduct an annual meeting for professional development. It wasn't until I was born in '64, there goes the age ambiguity, that they first fielded a staff in the office And today we have about 30 people that work for our public schools throughout the state of Montana. We provide professional development, policy work. We actually operate a business line with the largest self-funded workers' compensation and unemployment insurance trusts in the state in order to provide savings to our members. So why do we have school boards? First of all, I absolutely love that form of governance. I love the Montana Constitution that guarantees it. I think that the beautiful guarantees to the people of Montana in that Constitution are something to be treasured and protected, and not just in the realm of education, although that's certainly the place that I really enjoy reading through and have brought that to my heart, I guess I would say. My board 20 years ago embarked on a strategic planning process that started with a fundamental universal truth that they would never change, that the only reason that we exist is to develop the full potential of each person in Montana. And school boards have that role through elected school board governance. That's governance from my perspective that is much better than any other form of governance, not necessarily because it performs better, but because it's readily available to those who are discontented with its effects. If you want to have Congress do something, look at a decade, if you're lucky. If you want the Montana legislature to do something, they meet every 2 years. It takes a bill. It takes a complicated process. Lots of time and effort to get things done. Even the Board of Public Education has a rulemaking process that can span several months. If you don't like something that an elected school board can do, number one, you feel it, and they understand that you feel it because they're close by and readily available for you to challenge what they're doing and suggest another course. And all it takes is another properly noticed public meeting in order to make it happen. So what we like about it is its potential for being nimble and responsive to the people that it professes to serve. I would just echo everything that Representative Beatty said about the players here. I think that one of the neat things about that 1972 Constitution, and remember, this whole concept of our charge is to develop the full potential of each person. You might go, hey, is that computers? There wasn't even a fax machine back then. They didn't even have, this was not about technology in any manner whatsoever. It was about recognizing the intrinsic dignity and value of each individual and really embarking on a mission to make it happen, right? And if you take a look at how the stars aligned at that time, how did they come out of there with a clean and healthful environment guarantee, a promise that we're going to do our very best to develop the full potential of each person in this state, all of these other guarantees of observation and participation in what your government does, the right to know, the right of privacy, all of those things happened because you had a group of policymakers who were aligned together at a very unique period in time doing remarkable work. And I think that the work that we have the potential to continue is of that same caliber. It's really dynamic to see legislators from both sides of the aisle, Senator O'Brien, who's here with us today, and Representative Beatty, and a couple of others, Democrats and Republicans, putting aside those partisan difficulties and convening people, broadening this tent in a way that it's never been broadened in a long time, perhaps since 1972, and not just there to talk about the mechanics. How are we going to change the output here? But rather, how can we improve the outcome? So really remarkable people here at the table with me. I so appreciate them both, and I'll stand for any questions that anyone may have at a later point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, and our final speaker before you break up into your groups is Mccall Flynn, who is the Executive Director of the Board of Education. Welcome. Not a lot of room up here, is there?
Don't fall off the back of the stage. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Jill, for the introduction. And I just want to say thank you so much for having me today. I am very humbled to be part of this panel and deeply respect the two other panelists here. I've learned so much from them over the years and will continue to do so. Today I'm going to discuss generally who we are at the Board of Public Education and what our roles and responsibilities are. I find that there's not a lot of understanding of who we are, and so I think it's really important to share with you that information before you all go and ask some questions. So I think before I share anything about my comments today, I do want to preface that so much of what we do at the Board of Public Education is with our partners in education. We work very closely with folks at the Office of Public Instruction, our higher ed partners, those at the Montana Public Education Center that I mentioned, specifically Montana school boards. And we value so much of the information that they give us and the feedback that really informs the work at the Board of Public Education. So before I go any further, I'm going to give you a little bit of an analogy to think about as I share my comments of who we are at the Board of Public Ed. So imagine we're all out in the middle of a lake. And I'm from Anaconda, so I'm going to use Georgetown Lake as an example. So imagine we're all out in the middle of Georgetown Lake. We all have an oar. We're trying to get to land. And in this situation, since we're tying it to education, land is like the perfect public education utopia, right? Like tons of resources, not a lot of controversy around like masking or curriculum. It's just perfect utopia. So we're all in the middle of the lake. We have an oar. And we're all trying to get to land. Now you can imagine we may not all be rowing at the same speed. We may not be going to the same points on land. But we're all trying to generally get somewhere. And in this analogy, you could think of the Board of Public Education as somebody who can help set that roadmap. Somebody who can generally give you an idea of how you want to get to where you're going. And really it's then on you or other public education systems to determine how they want to get there. We all have good intentions. And so as I continue my comments, think of the Board of Public Ed as like setting the roadmap. Maybe. So Representative Beatty set me up a little bit for this, but the Board of Public Education really has constitutional authority under Article 10, Section 9, to exercise general supervision over public schools in Montana. Our mission is to supervise, serve, maintain, and strengthen Montana's system of free, quality public education. The Board of Public Education is actually the smallest state agency. We are a staff of 3, so you've got 1/3 of us here today. Our membership consists of 7 members who are all appointed by the governor to 7-year staggered terms. The governor, superintendent of public instruction, and commissioner of higher education all play non-voting ex officio roles on the board. We also have a student representative who serves at the election of the Montana Association of Student Councils to a 1-year term. By statute, the board is to have no more than 4 members of the same political party, or no more than 4 members from the same district. And the district is like kind of sideways through Montana. We currently have members from Savage, Fairfield, Helena, Bozeman, Clancy, and Townsend. The Board of Public Education meets twice yearly with the Board of Regents to form the Board of Education. And the Board of Education is governed by the governor and really is there to coordinate around goals and strategic planning of P20 education. And statutorily, really their only job is to agree upon a unified budget every year before, or every 2 years before a legislative session. So we will be doing that this November. The Board of Public Education has many duties assigned by law, as you heard a little bit earlier. But likely some of those that are the most important really are to set the standards. So if you think of standards for accreditation, assessment, any of the content standards, whether it be around math, science, art, all of those are set by the Board of Public Education. Additionally, the board is a quasi-judicial board where they consider suspension or revocation of educator licenses. They also set policies for school buses, gifted and talented students, and special education. The Board of Public Education also serves as the school board for the Montana School for the Deaf and Blind, which is in Great Falls, and we have our meeting there every May. So I know I've shared a lot of information with you, but that's what you get in 7 to 8 minutes. And so I hope I kind of explained why it is that the Board of Public Ed sets the roadmap through our standards process. And really, I think you'll hear a little bit later that our school boards really then take that roadmap and determine how they want to implement that at the local level. Again, I just want to say thanks so much for having me here today, and I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
You're coming up here? Okay. I'll hand this off.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. looks like we have a little extra time for questions and answers today via table talk, which I think is the crux of why we're here. It allows people in the audience to engage with each other and the panel on the topic at hand. The way it works is we'll take about 10 minutes now for everyone at their table to come up with one, maybe even two questions to ask the panel. And once you do, you'll find a volunteer at your table to ask it. And then in the time that when it comes to 10 minutes, someone come around the room with a mic and that volunteer will ask the question. I ask that you introduce yourself when you ask the question, and that members of the media please refrain from asking any questions. I think our panelists will be able to stick around afterwards for your questions. We'll be back in 10 minutes. All right. I trust everyone came up with some good questions. I heard some good conversations out there. First, though, I want to give I want to recognize somebody here, or a lot of somebodies actually. The Young Southeast Asian Institute of the Mansfield Center has quite a presence here today. I hope you're all learning something. Raise your hand if you're part of that program. All right. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. All right, and before we get into the questions, I just want to remind everyone that City Club is about civility and respect, so please keep your questions respectful, and please also avoid making statements so that we can get through as many questions as possible. Our board members, Dave Peppinger and David Westfall, will be going around the room to each table so you can ask your questions. Again, please introduce yourself before you ask your question.
Hello, everyone. I am Erica Sylvester. I'm a branch manager with Clearwater Credit Union, and we are a values-based financial institution, and we are really trying to promote financial literacy, and I would like to know how we can get more involved in our education system to make our entire community and our student body more financially literate.
Well, that's That's a great question, and with respect to educating students in our public schools, here's what I would recommend that you do. Go to your school board and ask them to make, providing, for instance, a requirement for a course in financial management or, financial literacy. The state does not have a requirement for that as it stands, not yet. The Board of Public Education is busy working on that. But I will tell you from personal experience, when I sat on the Hamilton School Board, we adopted that as a graduation requirement for high school students. And we could do that without asking anyone's permission. It is illustrative of the power that school boards have right now. I can't overemphasize how much your local school board can do. All you need to do is come to the meetings. School boards meetings typically are not well attended unless there's a disciplinary thing or a budget thing involved. School board members will listen to you.
I got it on, yeah. I also wanted to mention, I really want to thank you for that question because the Board of Public Education right now is actually revising the standards for accreditation, and part of those standards for accreditation are around graduation requirements and the basic offerings that each school has to offer their students to graduate. And so one of those things is financial literacy, and you can give public comment starting on October, I think it's 7th, around the financial literacy piece. There is a proposal to require financial literacy to graduate, whether it's part of math, social studies, or business. So I think it would be really good for you guys, if you're interested in this, to make comments so that the Board of Public Education has those comments when they're making final decisions later this year.
Thank you for being here. Monica Trinnell, a candidate for the new congressional district. And over the last 15 months, I've heard constantly about teacher salaries and looking at those 4 points about lifting teachers up, that we have the lowest teacher salaries in the country is what I've been told. Thompson Falls, it's $26,000, Seeley Lake, $33,000, Bozeman, $44,000. And how can they make that work with the cost of living and housing? What are your thoughts on teacher salaries? How do we solve that problem?
I'll do that. Sorry about that.
Thanks for that question, Monica. So I think that school boards set salaries for teachers through a collective bargaining process. And a lot of that has to do with what the priorities are in each of the school districts. Some of it is just really a matter of adequate funding as well. Just to give you an idea, there's if you were to raise, for example, let's say that we decided that we wanted to raise teacher salaries by $10,000 a year on average across the whole state, it would be $111 million a year. And likewise, right now we're at a deficit. It's another part of the compensation structure that I think is troubling, in that school boards, elected school boards, are the only public employer in Montana that doesn't have a guaranteed funding source from which to pay for the health insurance. Now, some of that's the trade-off between local control and the specific line items that it would take to set a policy objective on a particular level. Right now, what I think that we're doing, we're making headway toward raising base teacher salaries, which is the problem. Right now, we got a very significant gap between beginning teacher pay, which is 48th, last in the nation, versus average teacher pay, which, depending upon last year or this year, and MFBE changed the way that they collected the data. So I'm going to go to last year. Average teacher pay was 29th in the nation. And not only that, but public school boards over the course of 2006 to 2018 increased that ranking faster than anyone else in the country except for Iowa and Nebraska, brought it up from 48th in the nation up to where it was 28th, 29th. We have a continued disconnect, however, with the base teacher pay, which is the real problem here. We helped draft and conceived of and passed the Teach Act with Representative Jones last session. And I think that that may be the way that we continue to work towards something that would make a remarkable change there. If you take a look at all of the teachers across Montana, we have roughly, let's just say across a 25-year career, about 800 of them in each year. Some of those come from within our colleges here, some come from outside the state. But the bottom line is that it's a lot cheaper to figure out a way to raise the salaries for, say, the first 4 years, and of course not run over the top of and fall off a cliff for year 5, right? But that's a lot easier project than trying to raise them all in one fell swoop. And we've got that bargaining process as well. So I would just tell you it's fairly complicated, and if it's on my wish list right now, I would absolutely go right now for $111 million a year in order to increase the average teacher pay across Montana, including beginning teachers, by $10,000 each. And I would want another $140 million a year in order to bring their health insurance up from $6,000 a year to $12,000, which is what the rest of public agencies provide their staff. It's a big ticket item, and if you stack it up, almost like a household budget, you'll realize that $1.2 billion doesn't go quite as far as you thought it would once you start with all of those kinds of numbers involved. But it's an excellent question. It's something that we're working on vigorously with others, and trying to honor the bargaining process and at the same time maybe reconcile the gap between 28th, 29th on average versus 48th at beginning level.
Hi, my name is Julie Merritt, and I'm the president of the board of the Montana Association of Gifted and Talented Education. And my table mates and I were discussing some of the items, and we noticed about the strategic goal that Representative Beatty mentioned about proficiency-based learning. And one of the concerns is that there maybe is not enough rigor for some students in that model. So what our question is, how would you build rigor into the proficiency-based learning model?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I think the key to that, and I think where this will help those students that are not sufficiently challenged, is that by meeting students where they are, and students that are able to advance more rapidly, frees up time for them to take on other opportunities, for instance, dual credit opportunities or even some workforce opportunities off campus if they so desired. So I think that the answer to proficiency-based learning is not a detriment to this, but actually is an enabler, because instead of having a case, as Mr. Melton pointed out, where his daughter had quite a bit of free time as she waited in this time on task model, that time could be filled with other opportunities. And that's one of the challenges with implementation of proficiency-based learning, because it requires a rethinking of scheduling. It requires a rethinking of classroom management and that sort of thing, and hence, but I have seen it put in place in a few places that I've visited. I've seen what those classrooms look like. I'm sure our teachers are up to doing that. Of course, we, I think, have an obligation to make sure that they have the education and training themselves to meet this new challenge.
We actually do a lot of work with school boards across the state of Montana through model policy, and we're nearly at a point where almost everybody's a part of that program. And we have an entire series that's devoted to what we call flexibilities and efficiencies, but it really is about, in major ways, it's about making sure that we're providing academic rigor, that we're untapping opportunities for kids at wherever they are on the continuum of their abilities. And in that model policy is one way that we're working. The Office of Public Instruction, the Board of Public Education have been discussing the concept of having a minimum standard for what proficiency is defined as, so that it's meaningful. And if you look out there, there are a couple of very isolated examples, but we had a couple that were at meetings, education meetings, group meetings, and had suggested that perhaps they could define it as social promotion. Social promotion is the antithesis of proficiency. It's passing someone on in spite of the fact that they haven't gained a working knowledge of the content. So we're working actually in our proficiency model policy to up that game, and we don't want to get ahead of ourselves with the rule proposals that are out there, but I can tell you as soon as they're fine-tuned enough to implement, we're going to have them across every school district in the state. And we have an increasing number of school districts that understand that that proficiency model can, we have easily deliverable. We can have any student graduate with a certifiable professional degree of some kind, whether that's something that they're going to be able to take into the workplace, or whether it's dual credit and advanced placement that's going to save their family $22,000 in-state tuition a year. That was what my family was able to benefit from as a result of Helena Public Schools' devotion to that academic rigor. So it's a very important issue. We're with you, and we enjoyed working with your lobbyist this last session in implementing the gifted and talented rule into the statute as well. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Travis Mateer, I'm a parent, and our table talked about the role of technology both inside the classroom and outside the classroom. Positives, but more often than not the negatives, specifically around social media and how maybe adults from all walks of life can better model appropriate behavior. And maybe a question would be, is there any assessment tools of the technology and the role of technology as we're handing out devices to kids? And I think there's some big mental health questions surrounding technology, bullying, all that kind of stuff. And so I just wanted anyone to speak to that. Thank you.
I'll stand just so I can see you folks over here as well. That's a great question. We actually helped develop the law that went underused for several years. We first authorized off-site instruction in the 2005 legislature on a bipartisan basis. It created an opportunity for students to be able to obtain education via electronic means. It candidly kind of sat there a little bit dormant until about 2008 or so. Actually, earlier than that, let me back off. We created the Montana Schools E-Learning Consortium in order to create a bartering arrangement for school districts to offer off-site instruction in order to broaden opportunities. So if you think across our state, how many people per square mile do you have in Missoula? Probably in the low thousands, maybe 2,500. Liberty County has 2 people per square mile and 3 antelope. So there are certain places in our state where technology plays an important role in ensuring equality of educational opportunity across school systems of all size across the state. Now, what's happened more recently is we got, all of us got torn apart and brought into this whole deal of off-site instruction by the emergence of that pandemic. And I can still remember, March 20th, quick, schools are closed down right now, and 2 weeks from now you got to reopen them and provide off-site instruction. So of course, that's disruptive technology. It's not evolutionary, it's not able to be implemented in a way that's as thoughtful as we might like. It disrupted us to our core. And at the same time, depending upon your point of view, but I think early on in particular, before there were vaccines, it might be disruptive, but might be the only game in town. And so, I think that right now, as we sort of let the dust settle and we recognize what have we done here in terms of off-site instruction, that we're going to recognize that it's not going to be a universal instructional methodology. But I think that we're going to have to continue to offer it in order to meet the individual and unique needs of people that are in circumstances where they need that in order to bridge the gap in opportunities. We have significant policy development on protective measures in the school place in terms of course, addressing cyberbullying, but more than that, adhering and ensuring that those that are providing technology to our students in our public schools are abiding by uniform guidelines adopted by the Montana legislature that protect their privacy, that ensure appropriate access to resources that are children-friendly. It's a complicated issue for sure, but I guess the way that I would say is that technology is here to stay, but off-site instruction is not a universal way of doing business.
And if I could just follow up on that a little bit, I think your question kind of had two different angles to it, and I think Mr. Melton covered I won't say the virtues of technology, but the advantages it gives us in some instances. And we do have the Montana Digital Academy, which is something that we fund that allows us to do that as well. But I think there's an overarching problem here that we're talking about, and this has to do with the immersion of our children in the social media world and the deleterious effect it might be having on their mental health and their social engagement and that sort of thing. I wish I had an answer to that particular problem. I think technology is a powerful tool for us to use. I think the kind of technology initiatives and systems that we put in place are essential, but I'm not sure how maybe I'm just getting too old or something, but I actually would think that it would be great for our students to come to school and disconnect from the social media world for a few hours a day. Simply to interact with their friends across the table from them, eyeball to eyeball, rather than screen to screen. I don't have an answer to that, but it's something I think as a society we need to grapple with, and the solution will not be found just in the schools. It'll be found around the dinner table in people's homes.
Hi, I'm Pranav from Singapore, part of the YSEALI team. So pardon my ignorance, but I just wanted to ask, how representative are these education boards, especially of the indigenous people that exist in Montana? Yeah.
That's a great question. We work on it every day. The Montana School Boards Association has an Indian School Board caucus within our membership, and very vibrant and very active. I would say that within the communities where we have our reservations, we have concentrated areas where you have, let's say, above the average. There's 11% of our children in Montana who are American Indian, and I have members who have 75, 90, even 100%. And so some of that depends on where you're at. I think we do a rather good job in terms of leadership being recognized and validated by the communities in which they operate when you have a distinct population within a reservation, for example. More difficult to make that happen in some of our larger communities. Great Falls, for example, likely has a Native American population that is, if not the largest in the state, it's one of the top 3 or 4. And so some of that has to do with the political process, the people who choose to run for the seats, the what the voters will is in terms of recognizing them, but it's something we work on every day. And our Indian School Boards Caucus also has sort of a counterpart, a professional counterpart, and I'm not going to steal Mccall's thunder, but allow her to talk about what we do to ensure a voice for American Indian peoples and tribes within the leadership at our staff levels as well.
Thank you, Lance. The Board of Public Education, while they don't currently have any Native representation on the board, they have historically had someone from one of the reservations participating on the board. Additionally, what Lance was alluding to is there's a Montana Advisory Council on Indian Education, and that is an advisory council that provides input to both the Board of Public Education and the Office of Public Instruction. We also at the Board of Public Education have a liaison to Macy, we call it Macy, to Macy, and that liaison has an ex officio position on the Macy board. We meet with them every other month. They are integral to our Board of Public Education process. They share a report every other month to the Board of Public Education on the work that they're doing, and we very much value their input at the board.
I'm going to give just a quick deal here as well, because one of the reasons that we have our Indian School Boards Caucus and the reason that they formed themselves over 20 years ago was in part because of Article 10. Again, you know, this wonderful piece of the Constitution that says that the people of Montana are committed in their education and in their goals to preserving and educating others regarding the cultural integrity of our American Indian peoples and tribes. So this is a constitutional bedrock. And I think we've come a long way since, let's say, 2005, when the court said the state of Montana is uncloaked, indefensible in terms of how it's addressing Indian education for all in Montana. And we had a great legislative leader who was an American Indian from up in the Blackfeet Reservation, Carol Juneau, who spearheaded this over, I think, 3 sessions, tried and tried and tried again, and ultimately got it passed into law, and now it's embedded in the standards for education throughout our curriculum in each and every school district in Montana.
And continuing now, just a quick vignette on some current things going on in that arena. Right now, my committee during the interim worked on the challenge of Indian language preservation. We have statutes that allow for that right now. We did a reevaluation of that particular program. It's not meeting the needs. It's not effectively preserving Indian language. So as a consequence, one of my colleagues on that committee, Representative Windy Boy from up in the northern part of Montana, did a statewide multi-grassroots set of grassroots meetings to identify how we can approach this. And the net outcome of that is we think that to preserve Indian language in our state requires a concerted effort in the schools. Formerly, it was an effort, just a kind of a general effort of preserving artifacts, essentially. But we will not have vibrant Indian, we won't have live Indian languages here within a few decades if we don't take this seriously. So my good friend, Representative Jonathan Windy Boy, has led the charge on that, and we'll be seeing legislation to in the coming session to strengthen that program so that we can actually start getting the kind of results that we think are necessary to fulfill our constitutional duty.
Hello, my name is Alka. I'm from Malaysia as part of YCLE as well. Our table was discussing what was on the paper this morning, and we read that there are talks of removing the words equality, equity, and ethics from the public school mandate. What are the steps being taken to safeguard and protect the rights of students with disabilities, queer students, students of non-European American descent, etc., which could potentially be stripped away?
Thank you for the tough question. It is no secret the Board of Public Education has been revising many of our administrative rules over this last year. We've worked on educator licensure. We're currently working on our educator preparation programs, as well as the standards of accreditation that I mentioned earlier. I think your question's a difficult one because I personally can't speak for any board members. I know that there was just some information in the paper this morning, and so I'm not necessarily going to defend the actions that we're taking, but I will tell you that when the Board of Public Education sets standards, that really is, like I said this morning, the roadmap. Our job is to set basic standards of education, whether it, like I said, educator licensure, accreditation, assessment, whatever it may be. That is the board's job. There are school boards, there are educator preparation programs, there are other entities that really will take that information and then implement it at the local level, whether that's a college or a town like Missoula. So while I can't necessarily explain why maybe words like equity are being removed and possibly replaced by equality of opportunity, which is in our Constitution, I can tell you that we still very much understand our role to set those minimum standards.
Something to be aware of, and I think it's almost like a roadmap to follow. Whether everybody works through this okay every time, I can't tell you that there's some sort of a universal, perfect delivery of education to every student of every circumstance in the state. But there is a commitment to reaching every student. And if you look at perhaps the whole concept of an individualized education program, which until now has really been guaranteed to students with disabilities, and not just any disability, but particular enumerated disabilities that are set forth in federal law. So we understand, no matter what, got to provide an individualized education program that provides a free, appropriate public education to each of the children with these enumerated disabilities. The discussion we've been having about personalizing learning is really directed toward pursuing that goal for everyone. And so that means everyone. It means everyone, regardless of their circumstances, where we're committed to making sure that the education that's provided to them levels the playing field, so to speak. Maybe that's a bad word for me to say, but equality of educational opportunity. Not just an output, but an outcome. An opportunity for success for each and every child in our schools and everywhere else in Montana.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Bond, and I'm retired now, but I've been both an educator in Missoula and a social worker. So, and in my last job, I combined the two and educated parents. So, we have two questions actually at this table, and I'm going to combine them into one, and it's kind of a stretch. Our first question is more esoteric, and it speaks to what is being done to ensure that the children in this state understand the tenets of democracy. I mean, we're kind of in a crisis in this country, and if kids don't understand what we're talking about, we'll never be on the same table. And while that is also going on, we also have a number of parents, families that are removing their children from our educational system. So what is being done to ensure that children that are homeschooled also have to meet standards?
Thank you for the question. I can speak to the civics and government piece. Like I said earlier, the board is revising the standards of accreditation. Part of that accreditation standards, again, are around graduation requirements and basic offerings in our schools. Like financial literacy, there is also a push to include civics and government in the social studies requirements. Many school districts are already offering civics or government under social studies, but there is, like I said, some revisions that would require students have a half credit of civics or government in order to graduate. So that is one thing that the Board of Public Education is currently looking at. They also have talked a lot about the democracy of our country right now and trying to find some common ground. And that is one of the small things that the Board of Public Education, I think, can do to support that.
Addressing the issue of homeschool and private school students, actually we've always had around 10% of our student population choose alternatives other than the public schools, and it's typically been around 3,000 or so students who are homeschooled, and then another several thousand in private schools. And although that spiked up initially during COVID, I actually think we were rather proud of the fact that the enrollments came roaring back in this last school year, to the point that it challenged the fiscal capacity of the state because of the projections about how many would come. So we're at our highest enrollment in several years now. In terms of the respect accorded homeschooling and private schooling, it's definitely, at least during my entire career, has been a hands-off mentality of recognizing, and I think it ties into parental rights and the U.S. constitutional, U.S. Supreme Court's holdings going back decades about what that denotes. And parental rights include the right to direct the upbringing of your child. So, for example, even though we don't talk a lot about it in that context, the U.S. Supreme Court holdings that are controlling are pretty limiting on what you can do in the form of conditioning the ability to direct the education of your child through homeschool, for example, upon adherence to certain minimal standards. I will just tell you that every time that the bills come up, the halls fill up, and the bill dies an ignoble death about 5 minutes after it's heard. So, I hate to tell you that we've given up on the concept. That's not necessarily the case, but from my perspective, all of the work that we've done on off-site instruction, I know I sound like I'm a supporter of this. In its particular role, I do, because I think that if we can reach parents and help them fill in the curricular gaps that they may not be able to provide for their own kids. Number one, it increases trust. Number two, it adds value. And so, if we can find a way to provide participation on a part-time basis, even extracurricular participation, which this legislature passed. Like many of you in here, I'll go ahead and just tell you a little personal piece here, and I won't stray too far off the deal, but I'm one of 9 kids, old now. But among those, I have siblings that educate their kids in private school. I have a sister that raised her kids in a homeschool environment. Both of them are exceedingly successful attorneys, and I think that the quality of education is both good and bad in any one of those environments, depending upon who's providing it and how much they care. So our goal has been to provide opportunities for people to partake in the public education system to the extent they're willing, and then provide high quality when they do so. I know that's not a perfect answer for you there, but definitely over the entire course of my career, going back to the '93 session, I have never seen a bill inflame so quickly and so vocally, and I have, it's almost like a grand tradition. Okay, this is what's going to happen next, and after that, that's what's going to happen, and then we're going to move on to other things. So it is what it is, at least from my perspective in Montana.
So I can't say much more about the homeschool situation than Lance does. Understand that many schoolers do exceedingly well in educating their children, and you can find, I'm sure you can find examples where that's not true as well. But the fact of the matter is, I'll cite Lance's statistics. 90% of our students are going to be educated in the public schools. And some other percentage will be in private schools, and then there'll be a small group that are homeschools. Our focus, my focus actually in the legislature, I think most about how can we do better in our public school system, because that's where most of the students are going to be educated. And with respect to the enhancing or protecting our democracy by civics education or government education, I think that's absolutely essential. And I'll just circle back a little bit again. I'm enthused about the Board of Public Education's adoption of standards in this area or guidelines in this area. I will tell you, your local school board can put this in place right now. We did it when I was a school board trustee. We didn't have to ask anyone's permission. And and I think that the robust discussion in a community about what the content of that might be, well, I know it would be very interesting, even in my hometown. That's where the action is, folks. It's with your local school board, and that's where the community can express its desires and have the kind of discussions that are necessary for us if we're going to have an actual robust democracy.
Have we used up all our time? All right, so we're all going to run for school board and start running this ship? I think we should. Also pay attention. Yeah, it's a great gig, so you've heard here. Plus, we have a legislative session coming up in January, right? Am I right about that? So pay attention to that. I think we're here to conclude. Did you want to say some more words? Should I not dismiss everybody and tell you?
No,
Okay, sit
you can
down.
dismiss people when I'll give you the signal. Please join me in thanking our panel who came from far and wide, and by far I mean Helena, and wide I mean Hamilton. Mccall Flynn, Lance Melton, Representative David Beatty, thank you so much for joining us. Our moderator, Jill Valley, is always a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much. Thank you to our sponsors, Blackfoot Communication, University of Montana, and First Security Bank. We can't do this without you, and certainly with the audience, we can't do this without you too, so thank you all so much for coming. Our next forum will be October 18th. It's a little bit contrary to our normal schedule. It will focus on local ballot measures and bond initiatives. We should have something up on our Facebook page and website by the end of the week. I will hand it over to Jill to dismiss us, but again, thank you so much.
All right, now you can go. Yeah. Thank you for participating. This is what makes Missoula so great. And maybe you could grab one of our panelists before they escape if you want to talk to them more. Bye. Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to get something else. Okay.